For more on the changes facing big tech, let's welcome Microsoft President Brad Smith. Brad's new book is called Tools and Weapons, The Promise and the Peril of the Digital Age. Brad, thanks for being here. It's great to see you. I want to talk first of all about why you wrote this book. I think of superheroes to some extent where you say with great power comes great responsibility. Is that what kind of brought this on? That's a big part of it. I think if you look at the issues that you cover every day, it's increasingly tech everywhere. And we thought it was important to make these issues more accessible, to bring them to life so people can understand them better, and to show that there are some paths forward to address them, because I think the world wants the tech sector, and it wants people in government to do more to address these issues. Do you think this is really an inflection point right now in society? I think that there is an inflection point. I think it started last year with Cambridge Analytica, and I think we're just seeing it continue to unfold. And what we're really seeing is the first year of the next decade. This is going to be with us for quite a while. What are the big issues when you look around and you think, okay, these are some big problems. They need focus, they need attention, and they need some solutions? In some ways, there's a big part about trust. People want to know whether they can trust tech when it comes to the privacy of their data, the security of their data, how artificial intelligence is really going to work. But there's also a lot of issues that just hit people at home, and they're economic issues. What is AI going to do to my job? What is AI going to do to my community? What does it mean for my kids? What skills are they going to need to learn? What does this mean for rural communities that don't have broadband today? What does this mean for urban cities where we see tech towers being built, but middle-income people being displaced in terms of their housing? If you actually think about the issues we debate every day, they have these technology roots. And we wanted to really capture how technology is impacting all of the other things we talk about every day. Before we solve the problems for the rest of the tech sector and all of society, why don't we start with what you're doing at Microsoft? How are you thinking about some of these things in-house? Let's just take artificial intelligence. What's one way that you're kind of dealing with some of the potential problems and trying to fix it at Microsoft before it gets out? We started last year. We set forth 6 ethical principles that we said would guide our development and deployment of AI around issues like bias, accountability, privacy, safety, and the like. We've been advocating ourselves for new laws around facial recognition. We've said we don't want to see a commercial race to the bottom, because that's where you just let this genie out of the bottle, and then we wake up 5 years from now and we find that we're really not comfortable societally with how law enforcement is using facial recognition or how shopping malls are using it. Or governments. Exactly. At large. Governments around the world. And we recognize there are days when the smartest thing that we can do for the long-term value of our company is turn down a short-term deal. And we've done that in certain cases where, for example, facial recognition would be used in ways that would either cause bias and discrimination against certain groups of people, women, people of color, or governments, especially overseas, where we felt that facial recognition could be deployed in ways that could really unleash mass surveillance. And that's just not a future we want to help create. Can you be more specific, or is that about as specific as you want to get with some of those? We shy away from identifying specific customers unless they want to talk as well. We have shared that there was a police department in California. And to me, the interesting aspect of that episode was when we went to them and we said, we don't think it makes sense for us to provide you with facial recognition to do what you want to do. Our first concern was, would you either just going to go choose from a competitor? Yeah. Instead, they said, you know what? We are so glad that you said this to us, because you've kept us from making a mistake ourselves. And frankly, they've said, you're the kind of company we want to work with for the long term. So Microsoft has set out these ethical principles, and you're in communication with customers that you encounter. Should there be a more central kind of rule-setting function? Does somebody have to set industry standards in this regard? Ultimately, I think the answer is yes. I think we'll need industry standards to address a number of these issues. Ultimately, this is a space where we will need new laws. And I think this will be one of the leading policy issues for the next decade. Where do we want rules in place to govern how computers make decisions? It's clear that people want people to remain in charge. And if we're going to empower computers, we need to know how the computers are going to make decisions. You know, that U.S. law enforcement agency may have turned around and said, thank you very much. We really appreciate you pointing this out. My guess is there are some overseas governments that when and if you turned them down, would turn to somebody else. Maybe it's a Huawei, maybe it's somebody else, and they say, sure, no problem, we are willing to fill the void. So you can look for someone to set industry standards, but there are always going to be people in the industry, companies in the industry that play outside the rules. You can look for a government to set standards, but unless you have a global set of standards that everybody actually follows and listens to the rules on, you're always going to have somebody else who is taking what you've done and maybe stepping it up or giving it to players you wouldn't like to see it given to.
I think you've just hit the nail on the head of one of the global questions for the next decade. Because even if we can succeed in the United States in developing an approach that we're comfortable with, what will Europe do? What will China do? We want to see us take a high road in terms of creating technology that the world can trust. And at the same time, we don't want to be undercut by foreign competition. So there is a real global strategy that we are pursuing, that the whole industry is going to need to pursue. And I think that connects with many of the other trade issues of the day.
I mean, right. I'm thinking about this with China in particular, when we say that the reason we're here in these trade talks with them is because they don't follow any of the WTO standards or rules that they were supposed to be abiding by. How could we trust that any global entity would have not just every country, but a major country like China with massive population, second largest economy in the world? How can we trust that something's going to get done even if we have these ideals and standards?
Well, I think that there's a way to break it into two parts. The first is, what will a country like China do in a country like China? There is facial recognition being deployed there in ways that Americans would probably look at and say we're not comfortable in terms of mass surveillance. Ultimately, though, there's 1.4 billion people that live in China. If you add up North America, if you add up Western Europe, Japan, the other democracies of the world, you have an even larger group of people. And I think in some ways, in the race for technology, who's going to pick the winner between American firms and Chinese firms? The answer is Europe. The answer is Japan. And I think it's in part our case to be made to them that we need to work together to preserve values that we really feel are timeless. I mean, we're always excited about technology, but we also recognize that technology actually needs to serve timeless values and not simply march on over them.
We just heard from Elon Mui talking about these state attorneys general, 50 of them, who are going after big tech writ large. I have to say, all of the times, every day we talk about this issue, we almost never bring up Microsoft as part of that. And that's kind of hard to imagine when Microsoft used to be the evil empire that regulators were focusing on. You guys have really avoided this. How? What happened? What was the transformation at Microsoft? What's it like being there now, watching this with other companies?
Well, we were the first graduate of the School of Hard Knocks when it came to technology and antitrust. It's easy for people to forget today that in the late 1990s, the year 2000, the U.S. government and 20 state attorneys general were seeking to break up Microsoft. We learned a lot of valuable lessons, and the first thing we do every day is try to remember them. Because one of the lessons we learned is you have to really look at yourself in the mirror. You have to be able to see what other people see and not just what you like to see in yourself. You have to understand the problems that people are raising, which means you have to get out and listen to them. And then you have to be prepared to start solving problems. You have to compromise in order to find a path forward. If you look at the history of antitrust and big tech, which didn't start with Microsoft, it actually started with Standard Oil and the tech of the early 20th century, one of the real lessons is that when these things start, they last a long time. The entire Microsoft set of issues lasted 29 years, which was less time than it took for IBM or AT&T. And so, I think there's a lot of common sense, frankly, in what we took away. Better to figure out how to solve problems than just keep hiring more lawyers to fight them.
Bill Gates himself has said that he thinks that investigation, not only from the state's attorney general, but from the U.S. government, that really caused him to take his eye off the ball in some situations because he had to spend so much time focused on that. Probably the same for the rest of top management there. Do you think that is likely to repeat itself with some of the other big companies today? How difficult is it to be trying to lead in your industry and find all the fast changes that are coming even faster today than they were back then, but also be dealing with such huge questions coming not only from the U.S. government, from the states' attorney generals, from the EU, from all over the place?
If there's one thing that is clear to all of us, it's sort of the laws of physics. Time is finite. Every hour you spend doing one thing, you can't spend that hour doing something else. In those years at Microsoft, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, all of us, we had to spend a lot of hours focused on antitrust issues, depositions, settlement negotiations, the issues of the day. You can't help but wonder what you would have done if you could have had that time back. It's the opportunity cost of time. And I still remember when one of the members of our board of directors said that in the boardroom in the early 2000s. And it's a comment that has always stuck with me. You've got to decide where you're going to spend your time. And when you're in the tech sector, when the world is changing, when the technology is moving so fast, spending it on antitrust issues probably is not where most CEOs or senior leaders would want to allocate their attention.
Once the wheels of the federal and state governments get ramped up and start rolling like this, though, is it too late? Is there anything any of these companies can do to stop the onslaught that is probably coming?
I think that there is a lot of inertia to these things, and I think your question points that out. The answer, I would say, is it's never too late. And the real question for all of us, really, is what are the tech problems that we want to see the world solve? And that's really why we wrote this book. You can talk about economic power and the like, but a lot of what really, I think, weighs on people's minds is what it means for them personally. What does this mean for my data? What does this mean for my security? And I think the more we can work together across the tech sector to address the root issues that weigh on people's minds the most, it's not going to end every issue for every individual company, but it will create a healthier climate. And I think it's a healthier climate not just for the tech sector, but for the entire U.S. economy, because the truth is almost every company is becoming a tech company in part. So when we talk about ethical principles for artificial intelligence, we recognize we need to create these not only for ourselves, we need to get out and share them with our customers. And so when you put it in that broad perspective, then it's like it's not a day too late, but we better not wait until tomorrow.
So two subjects that I wanted to get to. Well, before we get to the privacy, let's just get to what a company's mandate really is. You're lean and hungry, you're new, you want to crush competition. That seems like what you want to do. You want to be so good at what you do that you're not worried about competitors. You're worried about your customers, you're worried about surviving, everything else. Suddenly you get to a point where you're so good at what you do that people start calling you a monopoly when you haven't really employed any monopolistic practices necessarily, because you're hurting competitors. And that happened to Microsoft over in Europe because they got a different idea of how antitrust works. Should we immediately assume that there's something untoward going on with a company just because it has a huge market cap and a dominant position? Or is it exactly what you were trying to do right from the beginning?
I don't think that one should ever equate size in and of itself with
Success,
a potential
size.
with a potential threat or harm. I do think that with power comes responsibility. And the point we make in the book, look, if you create technology that changes the world, you do bear a responsibility to help address the world that you've helped create. And I think specifically to address your question, you want to move fast, but you need some guardrails. The guardrails keep you on the road, knowing what you stand for, knowing what your principles are, knowing what you want to avoid. I believe in the long run, that's what serves companies and the shareholders the best.
I just don't see what the companies that are in the crosshairs of the AGs, they have nothing in common other than being really successful and being very large. So how can all of them, how do we suspect all of them of doing things that are unethical or doing things that need guardrails, as you put it?
Look, I'm not here to advocate for antitrust action against others in the tech sector. I am here to advocate for work that we all need to do to address the issues that technology is creating for the world and get at the underlying problems that bother people.
If consumers are not being harmed and in fact they're benefiting, where everything basically is cheaper than it ever has been and it's almost free, how do we know when to worry about emerging competitors being blocked out? I mean, when it's no longer hurting the consumer or the customer. That's who you normally think of, but suddenly you're worried about competitively that new entrants aren't getting in. How do you decide when that's a real issue?
Well, I think that you do what you just suggested. You ask, what's the problem here? Is there a problem that needs to be solved? Are competitors being harmed or blocked by offering their apps on an app store, for example?
Okay.
That's an example
That's
of
a
competitive
specific
harm.
one. But I'd like to harm most competitors as if I was starting a business. Wouldn't you?
Well, and that's why antitrust law in the United States and around the world says that you can do that when you're small, but once you have a certain size, a certain position in the marketplace, you don't have that same freedom to maneuver. I do think there's this broader dimension to increasingly antitrust law today, which looks beyond traditional competitive and economic harm. And it does ask, what is the impact of this on data? What is the impact of this on democracy?
Right.
And that's where the Justice Department is increasingly focusing. And I'm not sure that they're out of touch with the American public when they're asking the broader questions about the implications of technology.
Do you still, you tweeted out some favorable things, you're not part of the Business Roundtable, but you were favorable about some of the new, I don't know what they were. I guess they were guidelines. I'm not, I guess it wasn't solely virtue signaling, although a lot of it was.
The mission statement.
Yeah.
Mission statement. Was Milton Friedman wrong that enhancing shareholder value kind of trickles down and takes care of a lot of different issues, and you may not necessarily have to specifically say, I'm going to be a good person? I mean, you stay within the law, you satisfy customers, you expand your employee base, shareholders are, benefit, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Do you need to say, you need to think about other things? If you don't say that, does shareholder value actually end up hurting someone?
Well, I think the Business Roundtable has really defined the issue correctly for the 21st century.
Why?
Because what they say is focus on customers first.
Right.
Take care of your employees. Be a good steward in your community.
All that would happen from enhancing shareholder value, though.
But I would argue that the opposite is even a better strategy. Take care of customers first, and in the long term, your shareholders are going to do very, very well. Right. And I would almost argue, look at Microsoft. Look at what we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. We've sued the United States government in 2 different administrations when we thought we needed to protect customers.
Brad, you get bloated, tech companies get bloated, world enters a slowdown, you fire nobody, you don't tighten your belt, you're not profitable anymore. Everybody ends up not having a job, and when you were thinking only about your employees, and you're unable to do some of the really tough things to rationalize a business that why won't that happen?
Well, I think the point you're making is any good idea taken too far ends up creating problems.
And you think shareholder value and chasing that has been taken too far?
No.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, look, of course, if you say that we're going to take care of our employees but never restructure the company, we're never going to let anybody go, that's not a sensible,
somebody in China is going to eat your lunch, or someone somewhere else, and you're going to end up. Okay, let's do the privacy thing. So we were talking. I'm not going to add up the market caps of all the companies that have stolen my data, but I don't.
Or that you've freely given it to them.
Freely given it to them, and I'm fine. And don't answer this, but am I a sucker? That I've in many ways I am, but I love Google Maps. I take everything. I don't have nothing's that interesting for me, I don't think. But should I have demanded more compensation for all this information that advertisers are getting about me?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is equip people with the knowledge about how much data there is about them, empower them so they can make more decisions. I think, interestingly, maybe even ironically, the leader in empowering people with knowledge about their data is the European Union with its law from a year and a half ago.
Right.
We're the one company that said we're going to extend those benefits and those rights to all of our customers everywhere in the world, because we do think that people have the right to know what data we have about them, regardless of where they live. We'll, I think, benefit if the market goes to work, if there are more opportunities for people to use their data in different ways.
The EU did something, that's like, what is it, the blind kernel of corn? How does that work? Anyway, so they actually, that's good. Anyway, we're out of time. That went fast, didn't it?
It sure did. Thank you.
You know, I'm thinking I might read your book. I'm not kidding.
I hope you will. We wrote it so that it would be fun to read. That was one of our goals.
The book again is Tools and Weapons, The Promise and the Peril of the Digital Age. Brad Smith is the president of Microsoft, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.